Hey everyone, welcome back. I hope everyone had a great 4th of July weekend and celebrated safely. And yeah, had a good time. So thank you for rejoining us after we took a week off. I will have Chair.
Hey everyone, welcome back. I hope everyone had a great 4th of July weekend and celebrated safely. And yeah, had a good time. So
there we go. All right, technical difficulties. And we're back. We will have Representative Raymond Dehn from Minneapolis joining us. He is the chair of the Elections Committee, Subcommittee on Elections with the Minnesota House of Representatives, and just a very, very good friend of mine that I've had the pleasure of knowing for a couple of years. So joined by him a little later, and he can talk us through some of our election questions, voting questions, that kind of thing. So if you have anything you want to ask him or ask me, please feel free to leave it in the comments. And as always, I can't see who's watching. So if you are watching, go ahead and leave a emoji or whatever in the comments so I know that you are here and are watching. We do have a couple of questions that were prepped ahead of time. So we'll go over those as well, but please feel free to add them into the comments. So just to get started, I need to talk about COVID-19 as we have had a spike here in Carver County in cases. So total, we have 469 cases here in Carver County, 13 new cases yesterday. And that may be more. I checked this morning, so it may be more as of now. The age range that are being affected mostly in Carver County is 18 to 34. So it's not just, people in nursing homes or, people in certain areas. It is 18 to 34-year-olds, particularly in Carver County. Wear your masks. Please, please, I am begging you, as a person who lives with someone who is very immunocompromised, please wear your mask. It is effective. The science shows it. It's not that hard. Please, please, please wear your mask. Okay, that's all I'll say about it. Once we get Ray in here too, we can move on to the questions. Two things before we get there. He's in the waiting room. I'll let him in a second. Sign up for lawn signs. There is a sign up on the website where you can request a lawn sign. We will be getting those sometime soon, and we will get those out to you. And if you are a volunteer that would like to help us deliver those lawn signs, please let us know on the website as well, or you can email me, text me, call me, whatever. And we do have a spot on there for endorsement. So if you live in the community, if you are an elected official, if whoever, if you want to endorse this campaign, there is a spot on the website to do that. So please go ahead and check that out. And let me know if you have any issues. All right, we're getting Representative Dehn in here. Hey, how's it going? Yay, we are live on Facebook, so you're in. You're good to go. All right, everyone, Representative Dehn, Chair Dehn. If you want to introduce yourself and talk about what you do at the House and how long you've been there and how we know each other, whatever you want to say, go ahead.
Sure. Hi, I'm Representative Raymond Dehn. I serve in the Minnesota House of Representatives and chair the Elections Committee, at least this past session. And I've been serving now 8 years, was elected in 2012. The district that I serve is 59B, which is a pretty unusual district. It's got most of downtown Minneapolis and the southern part of North Minneapolis and the area in between, including North Loop and a little bit of Bryn Mawr neighborhood. So it's a pretty diverse district, defined in almost any way you can define diverse, whether that's faith, whether that's economics, whether it's ethnicity, whether it's, so many things that we could generally talk about. And I first got to meet Addie when she was working on one of my colleagues' campaigns in the State House, and now she's been working as originally a legislative assistant, and then as a committee administrator. So it's been great to have her in the House, and I wouldn't be lying if I'd say it would be a little bit disappointing if she was in the Senate, but it would also be exciting to see her over there and doing the good work that she does.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And you've done a little door knocking in our district too. So
I have. Yeah.
You know what Carver County is all about. So thanks for joining us today. I'm really, really excited that you could spare some time for this. So we've got a whole bunch of questions we have prepped ready to go, and then folks can ask questions in the comments too. So if you've got questions, put them in the comments and I will read them out. Someone did comment that they like my background and that I look good here. So thank you, Sally.
The Senate chamber.
Yeah, exactly. So our first question is, what will voting look like? You know, we're in this pandemic. There's a lot of kind of unrest and uncertainties. What do you think that voting is kind of going to look like in the primary and in the general?
Well, we know that there's going to be a lot more absentee ballots, voting by mail. I believe that as of the end of last week, whereas in 2016, which is the last presidential year, there was roughly 12,000 absentee ballots that were requested. And we are over 300,000 this year.
Wow.
One of the things we're hoping for with the COVID crisis was turning all of our balloting into mail-in balloting for those registered voters, and that they would be mailed, in essence, an absentee ballot, but it would be an actual ballot. And there, of course, would still be some polling places that would be open for people to vote on election day. We met some resistance in that, and we actually came to a compromise, which I think a lot of people were surprised, that there would be no objection to continuing to expand early absentee, no excuses voting. So anybody could request a absentee ballot to put that in. And along with that came how should I say it? The approval or the acceptance of $17 million of federal money for the Secretary of State to conduct our elections, as well as to continue to make sure that our elections are safe and secure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think you told me something about the average age of the election judges, that we might come into some issues with that as far as keeping polling places open or not due to election judges.
Yeah, in Minnesota on election day, there are over 30,000 people that work at the polls. And one of the big concerns, of course, with COVID is, interactions of people, create opportunities for transmission. And I think close to 70% of the people that work or volunteer in polling places on election day are over the age of 65.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the big issues was, are we putting people at risk that work at the polls, as well as those voters, to make a choice between their health and voting? And we didn't believe that was possible. Now, in the 2018 election, we had roughly 24% of the state of Minnesota vote by early absentee ballots. We're hoping that we'll get above 50, even closer to 60% this year, which will mean the number of people standing in line and interacting without social distancing will be minimized at those polling places that we do have up on polling, of course, on August 11th for the primary, and then November 3rd for the general election.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So get your voting by mail requests in sooner rather than later, everybody.
Yeah, and you can go to the website MN Votes, and I believe they can direct you to how you sign up to actually receive the early no excuse absentee voting. But I think we're getting really close right now on the edge for the primary of August 11th, but you'll be able to request one for November all the way up until late part of September.
Mm-hmm.
As well as we will have early voting places where people can actually go to facilities to vote early 45 days before elections. So in many cities right now with primary, a lot of those places for voting are open right now.
Mm-hmm. I believe we have 2 open in Carver County. One is in Chaska at the Government Center, and one is in Waconia. The Waconia one is only for Waconia residents, but good to know. Someone asked in the comments, is it possible to require that everybody who goes to the poll wears a mask? That might be a government decision, I think.
It's entirely possible. I would venture to guess that would be something that would be really difficult to pass with legislation at this point in time. The governor is going back and forth on making masks mandatory. in many cities now, they've adopted ordinances for any indoor public space that an individual has to wear a mask. So that's, sort of covers some of those polling places. But I think that this is unfortunately going to be one of those issues that for some reason is controversial. When I go out, I wear a mask, and I'm not wearing a mask to protect myself. I'm wearing a mask to protect everyone else from me in the event that I may have contracted the coronavirus in the past couple of weeks and have not shown any symptoms. So, the wearing a mask is to actually protect other people, not to protect yourself.
Yep. Folks that watch my town halls every week know that I preach nonstop about that. So yes, I agree. Another really interesting question I have not thought of. Other states follow the ballots with a specific tracking barcode for the mail-in ballots. Would that be a good idea here to reduce the fears of people collecting and destroying ballots?
Well, I'll answer this sort of in two parts. One, we will not have that for this election year. And the states that actually have that do have mail-in voting instituted in their statute. So they have a whole structure behind that. And, it works. There are, states with Republican governors and secretaries of state and states with Democratic governors and secretaries of state that swear by it, advocate for it. In Minnesota, we have over 100,000 people that currently vote by mail in some of our smaller townships and cities. So we already have over 1,100 precincts where voting by mail is how people vote. The issue of collecting ballots, that just doesn't happen. I mean, we have a system in place that will allow no more than 3 ballots to be delivered to an actual drop-off zone for that. So the chance of someone going out and collecting hundreds of ballots on the ballot, the absentee ballot, you have to have your Social Security number, your driver's license number, and there are a few other provisions that are necessary. So the thought of someone going around and collecting these and then having all that information on those individuals and then doing that, I think there's no evidence to show that happens in any state. And the thing that you'll hear used a lot is this notion of voter fraud. And there's a difference between electioneering and voter fraud. If someone actually collected 1,000 absentee ballots and tried to game the system, that would truly be electioneering. And that's a crime that's pretty substantial, as well as voter fraud, which I think in the past few elections, we've had probably less than 15 cases of charged voter fraud, not convicted voter fraud, but actually charged voter fraud. So it's something that's very, very rare, very, very unusual, but it's often uses to create a divisive point. And by the way, let me just add, in those states that do mail-in balloting, they see no advantage given to either Democrats or to Republicans. It's totally has very little to do with that as well.
I think that's a real big fear-mongering voter suppression tactic to talk about the voter fraud that doesn't actually exist. I think there was in doing research for this, I found 2 actual convictions in 2018 for any kind of voter fraud or electioneering charges. So it's virtually non-existent. And not to go off on a tangent, but the Supreme Court ruled in, I can't remember exactly what case it was, in Indiana, the Crawford case, upholding their voter ID law, that there was no evidence of voter fraud in Indiana in their history. So for the Supreme Court to say that not too long ago is pretty significant.
And we've had a legislative audit look at voting in the state of Minnesota, and they came back and said we have a great system in our state. We need to continue to keep it secure so that there's no infiltration from outside entities, and there's little to no evidence of any cases of voter fraud in the state of Minnesota.
Someone just commented too, we ordered our absentee ballots, safe and easy way to vote. Voter fraud is not the issue. Totally agree. Voter suppression is the issue. Absolutely. And we do have a prepped question about that, so we'll get to that.
Okay.
So next one is, what do you need to register to vote? We've already kind of covered this, but just an easier, delineation of it is to check out that mnvotes.org website, which we can put in the comments here in a minute. There's a couple different requirements for if you're voting from a nursing home or hospital, or from college, if you're homeless, that kind of thing. But just basically, if you want to register to vote today, what do you need?
Well, you need a driver's license with your address on it. Or you would need to have a piece of mail, utility bill of some type with your name that shows your address and that you live where you do. Or a neighbor can come with you down to City Hall. They can vouch that you live at the address that you live at. And when I say a neighbor, it doesn't have to be someone exactly next door to you, but it has to be someone who actually votes in that same precinct as you would be voting. And those are some of the requirements necessary to actually become registered voter in the state of Minnesota. Now, we have, same day registration in the state of Minnesota, and those are virtually the same requirements necessary to register on the day of elections. So that's pretty much what it takes.
Yeah.
And as part of your absentee ballot, you have to fill out that information as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Easy. So Jay asked, how do we detect people with winter homes down south from voting at both locations?
Well, but that would be a case of voter fraud. And I think part of it is we do not sync our voting system with other states. So it's possible for someone to actually do that. Legally, for someone to vote in Minnesota, this has to be their primary place of residence for over 6 months. Mm-hmm. So more than half of the year. We sort of, in some ways, trust people that they are voting where they live. And, that's part of our system. I mean, I think that anybody that ends up voting in two different states should really seriously think about what they believe about our democracy. Mm-hmm. And really, make a choice on voting where they live and only where they live, not where they live 3-4 months out of the year.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Okay, next question. And Jay, I want to say we'll get to your American Promise Pledge question in a second here. First one, can I vote for more than one party in the primary? And what about the general?
In the primary, you cannot. The primary is party-based. So you'll have two sides of the ballot. One side will signify a certain party, and the other side will be for the other party. Now, there's also some nonpartisan things that will appear on the ballot as well. So it's only those partisan races that you can either choose to vote Democrat or choose to vote Republican, or I believe there's an opportunity to vote for the other two major parties as well, the two cannabis parties. Mm-hmm. So that's for the primary. Now in the general election, you can vote for anybody, whether they're Democrats, Republicans, Cannabis Party, Independent, Libertarian Party. You can vote for anybody that's running for a particular office, but you can only vote for one person for that office. Otherwise, your ballot will be spoiled.
Mm-hmm. And both of us here on this call do have primaries. So everyone that's watching, please go or vote in August.
And preferably vote for us.
Yes, thank you. So is that data collected if someone chooses to only vote for Democrats? Is that collected in the primary or the general? And if so, how is it used? Who uses it? Who stores it, collects it, protects it, that kind of thing?
Okay, so when the Secretary of State collects the data, how you voted for a particular individual is never gathered. We work to get it so that in the primary, which party you voted for would not be public data, and it's not public data. In the end, what we agreed upon is it would be available to representatives of the parties, so a designate from the party who then can see how people voted, whether it's Democrat, Republican, or cannabis, one of the two Minnesota marijuana parties as well. So unfortunately, and I think myself and a lot of other legislators believe that we voted for a bill that allowed it to only go to the party that we voted for. And I'm not so sure if there'll be a challenge after the primary on who actually has access to that data. But there are some individuals that believe that all parties will have access to all of the different parties' voter information. But again, like I said, it's not who you voted for. And if you really thought about it hard, if it only went to the parties for which you voted, the list of people voting is publicly available. So someone could actually do a quick sort of regression and determine who was likely to vote for Republicans or who was likely to vote for Democrats.
Mm-hmm. And do we know if that data is like sold to anybody or if it's being heavily protected, which is my guess?
It's very heavily protected. It can not be sold to any outside vendors. It's only for internal party use, and that's it.
Perfect.
And actually, and if they use it for something else, and if they do sell it, there's a significant penalty and fine associated with it. It's a criminal penalty.
Pretty severe, from what I know. Yeah. All right. So one of my favorite topics to discuss with you specifically is the Restore the Vote movement. I am very in support of this. So do you want to take a shot explaining what it is and how we can get it done in Minnesota, why it matters?
Well, I think the way we get it done is by having a Democratic majority in the Senate. We know that there are some individuals in the Senate in the majority that are resistant to this, and they see it as an issue around, a way to suppress certain people from voting. Mm-hmm. Restore the Vote is an initiative that's been around the state of Minnesota actually since 2002. Every year the legislature's been in place since then. Every session there's been a bill to change our current laws. And let me explain our current laws. Minnesota is one of a few states that allows an individual to vote who has a felony conviction after they are off their supervision. And so if that means someone who was actually incarcerated, it would be after they are off their supervision. Typically, people think of that as parole. A little bit different, but we'll go with parole for now. And then those individuals who are on probation, and probation is a sentence that an individual serves while they are still out in the community. And we know that in Minnesota, at least in the past, there oftentimes drug offenses, individuals will get like 20 years of probation for a felony conviction, which means they can't vote for that period of time. So technically an individual could be convicted, get 20 years probation, get married, have kids, have their kids go through school, and never even being able to vote for the school board. Which I think is somewhat frightening. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to pass something in Minnesota, which about 15 other states and jurisdictions have passed, that allows an individual that if they're out in public with a felony conviction, they can vote. So if you are released from being locked up the day before election, you would actually be allowed to vote on that day. Or if you're out in public, you would be allowed to vote in elections. And part of the reasoning is if we've determined that people are safe enough to be out in the community. And if we expect them to participate in society, whether it's through job, education, bringing up a family, all of those types of things, one of the, what I believe is one of the fundamental parts of being engaged civically is voting. Mm-hmm. And this will help. And there's evidence to show that people that do pro-civic behavior are less likely to recidivate or recommit a new crime. So it's a way of getting people engaged in the system, feeling like they are empowered. And it also means that we would join truly not progressive or liberal states like Indiana, North Dakota, Utah, and other places that currently allow those individuals out in public to be able to vote.
Yep. Seems like a no-brainer to me. If we're expecting
people
to pay taxes and work, then they should be able to vote.
Yeah, and you know, there's the big misconception that a lot of these people would be in Minneapolis and St. Paul that would then get their votes restored, and fear of some GOP members that, you know, then Democrats are getting more votes. We know that evidence shows roughly 64% of the people out in public with felony convictions, whether it's supervision or probation, are outside of Hennepin and Ramsey County. Oh. And we also know that people tend to vote their geography more than they vote their sort of political ideals, which doesn't really make sense. But we know people live sort of collectively with those who think politically the same. So there probably won't be any advantage to Democrats or to Republicans. This is going to be something that's similar to mail-in balloting, that there's really no party is going to benefit from this position.
Mm-hmm. We had a quick question kind of along with this. Are felons allowed to get business licenses in Minnesota, or are they not allowed to do that along with the ability to vote?
No, the only other prohibition, there might be certain types of licensing around Department of Human Services that individuals that can't work cannot necessarily get licenses for those types of things with felony probations, with caveats that there are waivers, there are things that can happen that individuals can actually get employment, and they can apply after a certain number of years after their release from their supervision. Currently, the only right that you lose categorically in the state of Minnesota with a felony conviction is voting until you're off supervision. And then you actually do lose your right to carry a firearm, but you can petition the courts at any point to get that right restored as well.
Very interesting. Now, what happened with this bill in the Senate? Was it Senator Dietzig that carried the restore the vote?
No, it was Senator Champion.
Okay. Do you recall what exactly happened? Did it even get a hearing?
I don't believe it did get a hearing.
See, that's a lot of my messaging is being tired of not having anything happen. This bill deserved a hearing and didn't get it. So I fully plan to be a champion for this and get that hearing, get the bill heard, do something.
Sure, and you know, I mean, to that point, Senator Tiffmeyer, who chairs the State Government Finance and Elections Committee in the Senate, did not really give any elections bills any hearing, and that includes what is the most unthreatening, mundane corrections bill that the Secretary of State does every now and then, that just corrects some language and a couple other cleanup things, and she did not even give that a hearing. So it's a big obstacle, and it's unfortunate. But you know, the Senate gives their chairs a certain amount, at least the Senate GOP, a certain amount of discretion on what they can and or choose not to hear.
Mm-hmm. It's incredibly frustrating to watch, I will say. So the national popular vote has been a big buzzword around the legislature since I've been there, and probably before I got there too. So what would that mean if we passed a national popular vote bill in our legislature?
Well, the national popular vote is actually a movement across the United States as a way of sort of getting around, and I don't like to word the use getting around, but sort of, taking care of some of the problems with the Electoral College. We know that in the last few elections, there were critical times and that the popular vote far exceeded uh, for the losing candidate against the individual that won the Electoral College. For those of you who are listening that aren't really aware, when we vote for a presidential candidate on our ballots in the state of Minnesota, what we're actually voting for is electorates, which vote as part of the Electoral College for the candidate that wins the popular vote in our state. And different states have different number of Electoral College votes, but we also know that proportionally some states have, one Electoral College vote represents hundreds of thousands, while in another state it might only be tens of thousands. So there's a little bit of disproportionality in what the national popular vote is actually creating a compact that allows for a state to pledge its Electoral College votes to the candidate that receives the national popular votes. And the recent Supreme Court ruling actually, I believe, struck down some states that had tried to put in place that in law that the electorates of a state could only vote for the individual that received the number of votes. So it kind of clears up some issues for this. Now, it would still require, in order for this compact to be put in place, states that would equal 270 Electoral College votes in order for this to actually go in place. But I'll tell you, it also creates an interesting scenario where a state like Minnesota might vote for a candidate, and then ultimately that candidate does not receive the maximum votes or the majority votes in the national election, and that means ultimately that our votes would then go to the individual that actually wins the majority at the national level. So it creates a little bit of tension, but there are many people who believe the effectiveness of the Electoral College is actually not as effective as it was when it was originally established.
I've heard some arguments too that Minnesota would not be considered a flyover state anymore. That we would get a little bit more attention from the presidential campaigns. Do you have an opinion on that?
I think that that's definitely one of the arguments. We know that most presidential sort of campaigns focus a lot of their time and energy and effort in those 6 to 8 states that are swing states. Minnesota is not considered a swing state. And it might mean we might get more attention in the state from those presidential candidates. So, that's clearly the case. There are the counter argument that it just means that big metro areas are going to now have the presidential candidates going to big metro areas. So there's a little bit of trade-off. I have always been happy at the grassroots efforts that presidential candidates do in the state of Minnesota. Maybe not as big of media buys and those other types of things, but many candidates do, because Minnesota is a grassroots organizing state with our elections. I mean, when I talk to colleagues across the country and talk about going out and knocking doors, they're like, "You do what?" Because for them, they just mail out mailers and do commercials, and have a few events. They don't connect, candidate to voter at the level that we connect in our state.
That's wild. I guess I've never campaigned in another state, so I can't comment to that. It is killing me that I cannot door knock. I would not not want to do that ever. That's wild.
Yeah, it's a very unusual campaign season, and I think there's a lot of unknowns, and we're just going to have to see what campaigning looks like. I think a lot of campaigns are trying a lot of different things. Some of it is going to end up being more effective than the other, and we don't really have the data to know which is going to be the most effective.
Yeah, I'm a big digital advertising fan. Those of you who watch this know that I preach about that all the time. So I think I'm got an advantage there. So, but speaking of spending money on elections, when people say, you know, we need to get big money out of elections or dark money out of elections, what does that really mean?
Well, it means that there are outside influence and organizations and efforts outside of the actual candidates doing the work. Candidates need to, at least in the state of Minnesota, need to account for the money they get in and the money that they spend. Special interests don't have those same requirements. We've put forward efforts in the past several years to try to change that, that if a certain amount of money is spent on a particular piece of literature or some type of advertising, that the main source of that money needs to be identified as well. Citizens United sort of opened up a window for what's considered to be dark money, and that means that an individual can donate millions of dollars to a PAC or an organization without any identification regarding who that individual is, and then that organization can go out and they can use those campaign dollars to try to influence voters without really identifying the source of that money or what the intention is. So if you ever see an ad, look for a statement on that ad that says prepared and paid for by a candidate, or if ever you're watching a commercial or listening on the radio, it will generally say, I'm Raymond Dehn and I approve this ad. If it doesn't have that, it's outside efforts trying to come in and influence elections. And it's gotten to the point now that outside money far exceeds the amount of money that candidates raise and use in their campaigns. So, and it can be frustrating for candidates as well. Because sometimes, people that think they're supporting them are doing things that the candidate would say, I don't want this type of, campaigning going on in my race. So that's really unfortunate. And so when candidates, really try to hold up a certain standard in how they campaign, outside money totally circumvents that.
Mm-hmm. We unfortunately saw a lot of that in 2018 with the 47B race with Donzel Leggett. There was some really nasty mailers that came in on behalf of from an outside organization that were truly awful. So a lot of the negativity you'll see is from those outside organizations. And just to put some number context on this with my research that I've done, 18.5 million was spent on the governor's race last cycle in Minnesota from outside organizations, not including what the candidates raised and spent themselves, 18.5.
Go ahead, keep going.
In 2016 alone, outside organizations spent 1.4 billion in nationwide on our national elections, and 181 million of that is untraceable. So it's through PACs, it's through whatever organization that they can funnel money into or out of. And I've seen some pretty tricky stuff happen. It's a lot. It's a lot. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's a lot, and I'm not going to, try to have people believe that Democrats don't do this. Democrats do this as well as Republicans. So this is, again, an area that's really not partisan. This is an area of people trying to win elections and doing what they believe is the best thing. And remember, negative advertising about a candidate is not sent out with the intent of having you vote for the other candidate. It's sent out with the intent of you not voting.
Right.
So there's evidence that shows that negative campaigning against candidates suppresses voters sort of desire and activity on going out and voting. So, so yeah, I mean, I believe that, people should put forward their best ideas about elections, why they believe they're the best candidate. And that's what people should be making their decisions on. But, I don't get to make all the laws.
Unfortunately. I mean, I agree. I've said from day one that I am not going to run negative ads. I'm not going to attack my opponents. I'm just going to talk about what we want to do and what our vision is. So you're always going to get that, positivity from us. So I promised Jay I would get back to his question. There's this thing called the American Promise Pledge that I did sign. And he is asking if you have or would sign it as well. And it's basically just advocating for the 28th Amendment to overturn Citizens United. So I've signed it. I'm not sure if you've heard of the American Promise Pledge.
I have, and I've actually been the individual that's carried legislation in the past several years for Citizens United to overturn Citizens United. The move to amend, folks. I believe we need to change that, and if I haven't signed it, I'm more than happy to sign it. I was actively involved with an organization called the Assembly of State Legislators, and it was primarily a lot of Republicans, but Democrats as well. They were trying to pull together a amendments convention, because we know that Congress has not done much relative to Citizens United. They would argue balanced budget, and other individuals would argue about term limits. But we actually came together, legislators from across the U.S., put together what we believe was a set of bylaws that allowed us to function as a group. And ultimately, we put together rules and procedures should a convention, an amendments convention, be called. We believe that the Article 5 gives states and state legislators actually that ability to do that, although Congress is sort of, finding out ways of getting around it, whether it's one word in one resolution from one state that's different from another state, so they don't count it together. We know that the voting age was changed as a result of states moving forward on issues like this, that once enough states passed a resolution like this, that ultimately Congress knew it was time to act. And I think that that's what it will take regarding overturning Citizens United and changing the way we fund our elections in this country.
Do you think that I know this is kind of out in the wild blue yonder, that there is a chance to ever have even Minnesota just have publicly funded elections, period, or a nationwide?
Well, how many years are you talking about?
I don't know.
I would hope that there is. We know that places like Seattle, Washington has a pretty interesting way in which they conduct their municipal elections, that every registered voter, I believe, gets like $100 worth of $25 vouchers, which then a registered voter can actually give and donate to particular candidates. So they public fund their elections. I think we do a partial public funding in the state of Minnesota. That's where what's called the political contribution refund comes in, that an individual can contribute $50, get that back from the state. And then also on your taxes, when you check off monies going to particular parties, that helps to fund candidates that are running in the general election. So depending on how, there's a weird formula that's based on the amount of votes and funding and all this other state. But we partially have public funding in the state of Minnesota. I think we're probably a ways off from federal government. We had this one candidate that had some crazy ideas about public funded elections. His name was Bernie Sanders. And for some reason, 4 years ago when he talked about universal health care and free college and all those other things, people said he was crazy. But of course, we know that that's now common conversation for candidates and for elections. So sometimes things start as an individual saying, well, that'll never happen. But we see that our democracy is changing. And if there's anything, we know that our democracy can be very fragile. And at the same way, it has a certain amount of strength. You know, we've had a president for the past several years that I don't think understands a lot about how our government works, and he tries to circumvent a lot of those things. And our Constitution has actually held up pretty well. So I like to think that what we put in place has some pretty good safeguards that protect our democracy. And some people would say that in the state of Minnesota, we had Jesse Ventura for 4 years and our state didn't fall apart.
Yep, true. Very true. Yeah, I mean, I would love to get to a point where candidates don't have to spend a lot of time doing call time on the phones to donors and trying to get donations when we should be researching and learning and connecting with voters just straight off the bat. But we're getting there.
Yeah, and I agree, because, you know, I'm going back into session on Monday, which sort of limits my time and those type of things to, one, raise funds, but also connect with voters, because when I'm in session, I can't be on the phone.
Thanks. That's tough.
Yeah.
We did get a question kind of related to this about ranked choice voting. I am a supporter of ranked choice voting. I don't know if you want to take a stab at explaining that, or I can.
Well, I support ranked choice voting for elections. I'm not a big fan of it for endorsements. I think it's got some fraught problems, especially when you connect that to a virtual convention as compared to an actual convention where people have conversations. Ranked choice voting is simple. You get to vote for the candidate of your choice, number one, the second favorite candidate, number two, and the third favorite candidate, number three, on down. In full ranked choice voting, you have as many choices as there are candidates. As someone who ran for mayor in 2017 in the city of Minneapolis under ranked choice voting, I was fourth in the first ballot and the first round of counting, and I ended up coming in second, missing by a few thousand votes. So it's a way of an individual not having to plug their nose and vote for their least favorite candidate, if that makes sense. And actually allows them to vote for the individual they believe in. And then if that individual that they believed or supported in the first vote doesn't make it through to the next ballots, their second choice would then be counted, and so on. There are countries that use it in their elections. There are now states that are using it in some of their elections, and many municipalities are using it in their elections. Some people say it's really confusing and that people don't understand it. I think there might be a little bit confusion for some folks, but I'll tell you, in parts of Minneapolis that generally have lower voter turnout, the number of spoiled ballots was actually probably minimal as to other ballots. So it just goes to show that if it's explained to people as simply as it gets a bit confusing when you explain the counting. But definitely the voting it's really, really straightforward. Yeah,
very much so. We did have a comment I do just want to comment on from Sally, that the state of Connecticut started publicly funding elections. Many more women and minorities were able to afford to run for office. I have talked about this on a previous town hall about barriers to running for office. It's really, really difficult I work a full-time job. I have a part-time job when coronavirus is not a thing to be worried about. And, a lot of us have families and houses to pay for and other jobs, whatever it might be. Removing that huge, money-making or attracting barrier would make it a lot easier for us to have a truly representative government, I believe. Making it easier for people of lower incomes to run for office. So yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Sally, for that comment. So last thing we'll touch on, we've got about 10 minutes left, second to last thing actually, what are some common voter suppression techniques or tactics? Do they happen here? And what do we do if we see those things happening?
Well, there are a lot of common voter suppression tactics. One of the largest one was on a ballot initiative to change our constitution to require an ID and a specific ID for voting. We know that in states that require that, there are individuals that may not have the documentation necessary to get the ID, or the cost of getting the ID may be inhibits an individual's opportunity to get that now. There, of course, is counter arguments. The people of Minnesota voted against requiring voter ID, and I believe that was the right thing to do. There are other things that people do around issues of, for immigrants, to make immigrants feel that if they vote, they could get in trouble, and immigrants that are actually here legally have the right to vote. So there are things around that. I've heard of some pretty shady things where there are phone calls that, like a phone call might come up that will say, "Hi, this is so-and-so. I'm reminding you that election day in 2020 is Wednesday, November 5th. So please be sure to go out and vote." And so an individual who's not paying attention all of a sudden is watching news on the vote totals coming in on Tuesday, and they're like, "Hold it, I thought the election was Wednesday." That happens. In other states, they'll do things, and we don't do this in Minnesota. First off, in Minnesota, we don't require you to be a registered voter. We have same-day registration. But in other states, they actually purge people's names off the voter rolls if you haven't voted in the last 2 elections. So that's the case. And in some states, they do issues around individuals that are convicted felons with a certain name. And instead of verifying who that individual is, they will just purge all of the names of an individual's, like if there was a Raymond Dehn in a different part of Minneapolis that was unable to vote, my name would be purged off that the voting rolls as well. So if we're in a state that didn't have same-day registration, I go and try to vote. They say, "Well, you're sorry, you can't vote. You're not registered." And we've seen it in the past few primaries this year, closing polling places and making it really, really hard to vote. We know that folks in Georgia, many folks had to be in line for 7, 8 hours or longer to actually vote in their primary. And we saw that in Wisconsin with their primary as well. The city of Milwaukee, that normally has over 1,000 polling places, I believe, was down to like 20 or 30 polling places. So those are the types of things that they'll do to discourage people from voting.
So what if we get to the polls and someone tries to vote and that person says, "Oh, you can't vote"? There's a thing called a provisional ballot. I'm hoping you can touch on that. And if there's anything that someone like a bystander could do if someone's having an issue voting.
Well, Minnesota, we don't do provisional balloting. Because we have same-day registration, there's really no need for provisional balloting. The requirements to become a registered voter are the same requirements that you need to vote on election day. So if an individual is being challenged, and they have all the credentials, they actually can vote. There are individuals that at polling places that may try to make it difficult to try to discourage someone from voting. And the only reason that someone could actually really seriously challenge a person's actually voting without or even with the requirements for same-day voter registration would be a claim that they're a convicted felon and they don't have the right to vote. Now, the Secretary of State tries to update the records as best they can so that those names of individuals don't make it onto the the voting rosters of particular precincts.
Mm-hmm. All right, last thing we will touch on before we let you go. What is the Minnesota legislature doing now to ensure that we can exercise our right to vote? And what should someone like me, who a newly elected or elected next cycle senator or representative do to make sure that every Minnesotan who is eligible to vote can?
Well, I think that over the past few years, we've worked really, really hard to try to make voting easy and convenient and safe and secure. So we don't want to sacrifice safe and security for voting in our elections at the expense of ease and convenience for voters. This past couple of years, there's been issues around vote by mail, automatic voter registration, which means that anybody who registers or has a driver's license, they automatically become registered voters. So you don't have to go through the hassle of same-day registration. So if you're on top of your license when you move to a new place and you update that, that would actually be updated automatically in the voter registration polls. Those are the couple things that are going to be important. There are some other things that are critical, and that has to do with assisting people at the polls. Currently in Minnesota, we allow 3 individuals to be assisted by one particular individual. And there was a recent ruling in Texas that that's actually a violation. So we tried to change this past year, but it wasn't able to move forward because of objections of much of the GOP. So those are a few of the things that we can continue to do to try to make voting safe, secure, easily accessible, and convenient for voters, as well as passing Restore the Vote would be a huge thing for roughly 40 to 50,000 Minnesotans.
Absolutely. I'm in full support of that. And I do have to say also at the close of this that we have a fantastic Secretary of State in Steve Simon. Very, very efficient, great guy. So I'm glad that we have what we've got here in Minnesota. So any closing comments you want to make, Chair Dehn?
Well, other than thank you, this is an important topic. There's lots of misleading information out there regarding elections. I'm glad and I hope that I have cleared some of that confusion that might be there and that I didn't add to the confusion, which sometimes can happen when you cover a broad range of election information. I would just encourage all voters to actually get out and vote. And of course, I'm a big supporter of Addie Miller running for the Senate out in the Chaska area for folks out there. We know that there's a reputation that it's a ultra conservative district. I'm not so sure it's ultra conservative. I actually think there are a lot of individuals that believe in good government, in some areas progressive government, and I think that you have an incredible candidate running for the Senate out there. So support her.
Thank you. That's a huge compliment coming from you. So thank you. I really appreciate it. Thank you for joining us today. And as always, if anyone has questions, comments, concerns, anything, just let me know in the comments or send me an email and we will take care of that for you. And until next time, we'll see you next week. Thanks.
Okay, great. Enjoy the afternoon, folks.